But we can continue with that graduation theme because, frankly, that was a fun one. The YouTube, Facebook live streams are going to start shortly as well. I'm going to repeat what I just said, but I will also apologize. I just had a tooth removed. I had a cracked tooth last week, and they had to take it. They had to take it out. My mom was just calling, so I just had to. Well, I'll call her back in a little bit. But I just had a cracked tooth, and they took it out, and then they screwed in, I guess, a thing that they're going to eventually have to put the implant. So this entire half of my face is numb, and so at least today I have an excuse to sound funny. Oh, hey everyone. Now I'm on, if you see me looking away, I'm now on Facebook and YouTube. So hi everyone on Facebook and YouTube. Sal here for our daily homeroom live stream. For those of you all who are wondering what this is really just something we started when we started seeing school closures and social distancing. And we said, hey, this could be a cool way for all of us to stay in touch. And sometimes I have guests, and sometimes we just do Ask Me Anythings. Today, the guest is me. So we'll just do Ask Me Anythings. I was just telling the Instagram crowd, who is, a little bit lower here. If you ever see me not making eye contact, they're right over here. Oh, I guess, is that me on Instagram? I don't know. This is bizarre. A little bit trippy. But I was just telling them that I had a cracked tooth as of last Friday. I was eating a peach, which is not normally considered to be a hard tooth shattering thing, but it did somehow crack my bottom left molar. And so it's been incredibly painful, but considering all that's happening in the world, as I say, it's on the edge of the type of problems you want to have, because obviously there's a lot of folks going through a lot more right now. So I just got kind of an emergency dental thing, and this entire half of my face is numb. Let me see. My mom just called, so she keeps calling. Maybe one of these days I'll just answer the phone with my mom. That could be entertaining. But yes, this entire half of my face is right now numb. So I have an excuse today to sound funny. A better excuse than I normally do. So before I start, I do want to make my standard announcement. Remind everyone that Khan Academy is a not-for-profit, that we exist only because of philanthropic donations from folks like yourself. So if you're in a position to do so, please think about making a donation. I want to give a special shout out to several corporations that have stepped up to support Khan Academy over the last few weeks. Bank of America, Google.org, AT&T, Novartis, and Fastly. Thank you for that support. So with that, let's get into the heart of it. And I might cut it short because all sorts of weird things were happening in my mouth right now, and I apologize if I have to wipe my mouth. It might not be the most pleasant viewing, but yes, half of my mouth is right now numb. But I'm a big habit of consistency and habit, so that's why I want to do this regardless. So please ask me anything. All right, from Twitter, Greg Ferenstein. Oh, I know Greg. I have so many questions. Does your beard have a nickname? Will you read me a bedtime calculus problem? Can we be friends? Well, if this is the same Greg Ferenstein that I do know, I think we're already friends. Maybe this is a different Greg Ferenstein. My beard does not have a nickname. That I think would be, I have some eccentricities, but they have not quite gotten there yet. Will you read me a bedtime calculus problem? Maybe. Think about that. Think about how we can do the logistics. I'll wait for my tooth to heal before I think about bedtime calculus problems. Okay, from Facebook. And, I said this is Ask Me Anything, and it can be literally about anything, but I thought last week when we did the graduation theme, that was also fun, because then I got to be kind of Uncle Sal and give life advice and wisdom, and you could take it for what it's worth. So from Facebook, Lori Ann Stahl Schneer. I would love to see school districts convert to using Khan Academy regularly. I think the classroom flip, students watch videos from teachers or Khan Academy at night and work through their assignments in the classroom will aid teachers. Why is this approach not implemented yet? So those of you who don't know, what Lori is referring to is something that we've sometimes been associated with, but it's not something that we came up with. This notion of a flipped classroom predates Khan Academy. Arguably, this is what Socrates did, where students would do reading ahead of time, and then when they got to class, they would engage in, I guess, a Socratic dialogue if it was with Socrates. But the idea is that the the learning, the information retrieval or coverage happens at your own time and pace. And that's especially doable now in the time of on-demand video. And that way, when you get to a classroom, you're able to dive deeper, do problem solvings, have conversations, actually have human to human interaction. And so that's why people call it a flip. And once you do that, you can actually go even further. Because one of the reasons why a classroom all has to move at the same pace is because in a traditional classroom, you have a lecturer, and the lecturer by definition is at a fixed pace. But all of a sudden, if students are able to watch content or even practice at their own time and pace on their own, then when they get to the class, they can have more supports. And in theory, every student could go at a different pace. And, I don't think it has to be strict videos at home or lectures at home and then problem solving in the classroom. I actually think it could be whether you're in the classroom or at home, you should do whatever makes sense for you. So work at your own time and pace on exercises and videos. And then when you're in the classroom, you have extra supports of your peers, your teacher. The teacher can look at the data and see, hey, so-and-so's having a problem, or maybe 3 students are having trouble. I can have a small group session with them while the other students continue to work at their own time and pace. And we've seen this in many, many classrooms, and students love it because it's much more interactive. They get much more support, and teachers really like it because they get to form these deeper connections. They're really able to do differentiated instruction. To your question of why we're not seeing more of it, I think it's just it's a different way of thinking about classrooms. And, for the most part, it just sometimes takes time for people to realize there's a shift. I've given talks to groups of educators, and they all intellectually really agree with this idea. But it is sometimes harder to move past maybe what you're used to in a traditional model. The one silver lining perhaps of this COVID crisis is that we are seeing many, many more teachers move to this type of a model, because obviously with people staying at home now, you're not getting as much, I guess you could say, seat time in the classroom. And so a lot more of the information delivery or the lectures or whatever you want to call it, and the problem solving has to happen at a student's own time and pace. And that way, when students and teachers get on Zoom or Google Hangout or whatever, they have a lot more interaction, because obviously it makes no sense to just give a lecture on Zoom. That might as well just be a video. And honestly, that's not just about Zoom. That could be true of the real world too. If in some universities there'll be a lecture with 300 students, that could and should be a video. And ideally, the students and the teachers could interact with each other instead, which would be far more human. And if you see me keep shifting my eyes from a little part of my screen to another, it's because I'm trying to make eye contact with both Instagram and the Facebook, YouTube live streams and read the questions. So my apologies. All right. There's, from Facebook, Ursa Khan says, I hope you don't mind, but I tell people that you're my cousin. Sounds fine to me. For all we know, we are cousins. Cousin Ursa. All right. There are, YouTube for Eason asks, if you taught in a public school, what would you teach? One of the things that when I was in college, I used to say, if there was such a thing as a PhD in everything, that's what I would want to do, because I actually can get very excited about teaching almost anything or learning about almost anything. So, math is interesting, physics, chemistry, biology. I would love to do literature. I would love a philosophy course. I think that's what keeps things interesting, is where you want to teach things where you have some grounding and familiarity, but it's also fun to be on that learning journey, oftentimes with the students. And oftentimes that makes the teaching that much more authentic, because you're that much closer to empathizing with the experience that the students are having at that moment. But, in in-person classrooms, I really like as much interactivity as possible. We started a little lab school. It's in our office. It's called Khan Lab School. And, roughly once a week or once a month, I do a seminar with the middle and upper school students. And that we just kind of, I start with a question. I just say, what is the meaning of life? Small question. And then really facilitate a Socratic dialogue. So I like doing things like that, or I like doing simulations and games with students. And I like it when you get in the room, the more cross-disciplinary it could be. So oftentimes in that hour, we will go into philosophy, politics, economics, physics, math, and I think that's what really forms the connections for students. And frankly, I learn something interesting every time I do it. I think some of the fun is when it's not predictable, when it's not just from the teacher to the student, but it's also from the students to each other and to the teacher as well. Let's see. From Facebook, Ganesh Golapelli, do you have any plans to translate content in English and Indian languages? Simple answer is yes. We have a whole effort going on in India. We have a team in Delhi and in Bangalore that is redoing and translating content into the largest Indian languages. We also have a project in Hinglish. For those of you who are not familiar, that is a hybrid of Hindi and English, which is apparently a fairly standard method of learning a lot of topics or the language of education in a lot of North India. So yeah, we are doing that. Simple answer. So look that up. Look up Khan Academy India, and I think you should be able to find that. Okay, from Facebook, Cassava Rahman asks, how long did you study and how long do you recommend study? How are you motivated to study when you were young? So I guess that question, do you mean how many years did I go to school, or when I studied in school, how long did I study? I guess I'll answer both. In terms, I guess the first one's easier to answer. My undergrad, I did a master's degree, but all of that stuff happened in about 4 years. And that was CS in math and a master's in computer science, electrical engineering. And then I went to business school for 2 years. So you can add up. And then I was working for 2.5 years between undergraduate and business school. So that's how long I went to school, formal schooling, I guess you could say. In terms of how long did I study, it really depended on the context, depending what I was doing at the time. What I found in courses like math and physics and chemistry and biology, essentially STEM courses, or even programming courses, I found that if you do the problem sets and you're always just thinking about it, that you actually don't need to do a lot of studying or a lot of cramming. If the professor is about to do a problem, try to do it ahead of time, or try to do it at the same time that the professor's doing it. If you're doing all of the problem sets, you're doing all the projects, I found that the tests are actually quite intuitive. I have peers, and I don't think it's anything about intelligence, who sometimes would, they're kind of mindlessly note-taking in a class and maybe not actively learning. And then they find that when they go right before the final exam, they have to do a lot of cramming. And so I'm a much bigger fan of active learning. In Roll and Roll Schoolhouse, I was a little bit infamous in college that, certain lectures I found a lot of value in, and I found that I could do that active learning, and I could, and then others I did not. And so I sometimes didn't go to them. And instead, I would go and I would get out the textbook and I would do problems on my own. And I found if I did that all term, that when I got to the class, that I would, when I got to the exam, I had to do a lot less real studying. But other subjects that might have had, more content to them or more terminology, I wish I could say that I wasn't, a super procrastinator, but there were times in college that I pulled all-nighters and, and in hindsight, I wish that I had done it more regularly. The more mature kind of, fully developed frontal lobe Sal would have said, yeah, if I just worked on it a couple hours every day, then I would have not had to pull those all-nighters. But, in college, you might find yourself, 3, 4, 5, 6 hours the night before test. If you haven't been doing what you're supposed to up until then, you might have to do that type of thing. But I don't condone it. But yeah, you're going to have to be the judge yourself of how much to study. But I think the most important thing in everything in life, I say this about Khan Academy, it's okay to binge do it every now and then, but the better is to form a regular habit, 20, 30, 40 minutes a day in anything is going to actually build those muscles. And frankly, not only will you not have to cram for the test, but you're likely to have better retention, because oftentimes you just cram for the test, you take the test, you go sleep for 16 hours and you wake up, you're like, what just happened? You might not remember a lot of what just happened. All right. So there's from Facebook. This Duo, this Khan Academy Duo. Tell us why you love some of your favorite science fiction authors, please. And then Dan from Khan Academy is asking, Dune or Foundation, which one do you prefer and why? So to answer Duo, some of my, the second question from Dan kind of answers, I'm a big Arthur C. Clarke fan. Obviously kind of the whole 2001 series, the whole notion of, I also like Childhood's End. There's a bunch of good Arthur C. Clarke stuff that are very enjoyable. Isaac Asimov, I've talked a lot about. George Herbert, Dune. You can see behind me a lot of these books are there. Let's see where's the Dune? But I'm not a big believer it's in stack ranking everything in your life. It's like stack ranking your children. You love them all, and they all add dimensions to your life. But I'll tell you why I loved many of these things. Foundation, I've talked about it many times. The Foundation series, I'm not giving the plot away. There's a lot of, it's a good read. Uh, and I envy any of y'all who haven't read it because you get to enjoy it for the first time. But it takes place 30,000 years in the future. Humanity has colonized the galaxy. And there's kind of this mathematician, historian, psychologist type academic named Harry Seldon who develops this science of psychohistory. And he, through his math, shows that there's a very high probability that the Galactic Empire is about to enter into a 10,000-year dark ages. And he decides to do something about it. His math shows him, his science shows him that if he's able to collect the galaxies, the civilization's knowledge, and put it in the periphery of the galaxy as a foundation, that will shorten the dark ages from 10,000 years to 1,000 years. And, when I read that as a kid, I think I first read it in middle school. I was like, this is epic. First of all, it was the first time that I really appreciated that, Harry Seldon is right. If the single most important nugget for civilization or for people is at the end of the day, how much they're able to leverage their human potential. And that all boils down to really knowledge. And so that's number one. And that probably put a seed in my mind later on when I was working on Khan Academy that this could matter a lot. Maybe Khan Academy could be this foundation for the world that could maybe prevent us from getting into a dark age, or maybe elevate humanity to a whole other level, whatever else. And the other thing that I was inspired by Harry Seldon was that he thought on that time frame. Most of us do not think, oh, what's going to happen in 1,000 years? What can I help to keep, that 10,000 years of pain and war and famine instead of being 1,000 years, because most, a lot of us say, well, I've probably got another, 60 years on this planet at best. I mean, many of you young people watching, hopefully will have many, many more years. We can talk about, this whole notion of the singularity and if medical science can extend lifespans, who knows, there might be some generation that lives much, much longer. Actually, I think we're going to bring David Sinclair, who's done research on that, onto our live stream at some point. But I was inspired that maybe we should be thinking on that type of a time frame, because that's probably what's going to help humanity. And it doesn't even have to be 10,000 years or 1,000 years, but even think on a 100-year time frame or a 50-year time frame, which I found incredibly inspiring. And that I've told many of y'all, that was one of the reasons why I set up Khan Academy as a not-for-profit. It was delusional 10 years ago when I was operating in this very same walk-in closet that I'm in right now. But I said, maybe Khan Academy could be like the foundation. It could serve one day billions of kids for hundreds of years, and be one of the great institutions of the world. And it was frankly outright delusional back then, but it's feeling a lot less delusional now. We have 100 million registered users. There's no reason that can't get, we've grown 100-fold over the last 10 years. Why couldn't we grow another 10-fold and get to 1 billion and really build out the content and the software and the tools and all the stuff so that we really, that no matter where you are born, if you at least have access to a low-cost device, and the devices are getting cheaper every day, and internet access, that you have a lifeline. It could be in some village that, has no school. You still have a lifeline. Or it could be a place that does have a school, and then you're able to use this thing to empower the school, to empower the teachers, so that you get more personalization and more access to more content. And there's ideas of, ways to pair people so that one student could tutor another student, even if they're in completely different places or different countries. So anyway, that's foundation. Dune is really, Dune is epic because it also takes place, I think, several thousand years in the future. And, it's obviously, it's kind of an allegory for the whole, energy, and whether, many would argue that, because of oil in the Middle East, that has made the Middle East a very tough, there's especially coming out of World War I, when people realized that oil was very valuable and the Ottoman Empire was broken up. Many people, that's why you've had that instability, because there's been so much interest in oil, which is, obviously it could be an issue of national security and definitely an issue of economic security. And so Dune takes place, I think, 3,000 years in the future, but it's the same thing, that there's this planet Rakus that you can mine spice, and spice is used by the navigators to be able to do interstellar travel. and so it's analogous to oil. But that makes Arrakis, which has a lot of parallels to the Middle East. It's kind of a desert planet, uh, and it has some of these, there's some nomadic people who live there, but it makes them kind of a tension point, and so there's kind of a power grab there. So it's a good metaphor for geopolitics and politics, and but then there's also a bit of a metaphysical layer on it, where the main character is kind of perceived as the kind of the savior on a religious level. There's this concept in Islam known as the Mahdi, which is kind of the savior, the person, the person who comes at some future point, and so the people who live on Arrakis are kind of this neo-Islamic. You can imagine how religions might evolve over thousands of years, and so they still have retained, and they think the main character is that, and he does seem to have certain powers or data points to back that up. So anyway, as you can imagine, anything that is truly epic and expands your mind and makes you kind of think beyond I have to go to a dentist appointment to remove my tooth, or I better go buy some baking soda tonight, and instead makes you think about, like, wow, what are we, and where are we in the whole scope of time and space, and what could we become as a civilization, I think is always really interesting. I think we sometimes forget that we are an intermediary on some form of pathway, of some form of humanity 1,000 years from now might be very, very different than humanity today. But we, us, the collective we, are the people who are going to kind of define what that trajectory is. So it's just really interesting things to think about. So let's see. Ravender Bhojwani asks, what are the top challenges for Khan Academy to scale their product from just add-on education to become an official part of school curriculum, specifically in developing countries like Pakistan and India, where government school systems can benefit a lot from Khan Academy? Well, there's a lot of things. I, at the beginning of this, I made my standard plug for resources. We're the budget of a large high school. It is a substantial budget, but we're the budget of a large high school, but we reach over 100 million students in a year. So I'd like to make the argument it's a very strong social return on investment, and that could one day be billions. We need to add more content. We're starting to add English and language arts. I would love to add middle school science. We already have really math from pre-K with Khan Academy kids all the way through high school and early college level math. The sciences, biology, chemistry, and physics are either added or being improved upon as we speak. So I think that lays a very strong scaffold. We want to constantly improve the software, the exercises on Khan Academy, so you get as much practice and feedback as you need. We're constantly looking at the data so that we can improve those items. I'm intrigued by things in the future of how can you use Khan Academy as evidence for what you know to the broader world? So it can plug you into higher education, or you can even get a job or whatever else from Khan Academy. And then I think there is a very real issue of device access and training and support. And we are starting to do that type of work. We're working with school districts. We're mainly in the US, but we do have efforts in places like India and Brazil as well to start integrating with their technology and their rostering systems, and do training with their teachers and their administrators. And then, you can imagine device access, especially in places like India or Pakistan, are not where they need to be in order to fully leverage Khan Academy to empower teachers and students in schools. But, my hope is over the next 10 years, a lot of that stuff is going to happen. And frankly, the COVID crisis is accelerating a lot of that. So let's see. There, from Instagram, WDick07 says, do you play an instrument? I do kind of. I play guitar. I'm a mediocre guitarist. It's more of a means to an end to sing, and I'm mediocre at that as well. I've picked up a little bit of piano. My oldest son is actually quite good at piano, and I've kind of observed what he's been up to. But even there, my piano is really just an excuse to belt out a tune every now and then. So let's see. We only have a little bit more time. So let's see. Is there any other questions? So a couple of people are asking about the Junior Breakthrough Challenge. Katie AU and Natalie O. Advice for the Breakthrough Junior Challenge. Excited about the Junior Breakthrough Challenge. First of all, I am excited about it. For those of you who do not know what it is, the Junior Breakthrough Challenge is a there's the breakthrough prizes, which you can kind of view as the new Nobel prizes, where several folks out here in Silicon Valley, led by Yuri Milner, but also Mark Zuckerberg and Sergey Brin and Eric Schmidt, they funded this prize. It's like a Nobel Prize. So, these top mathematicians and scientists and doctors in the world, they give a $3 million prize for like really, disruptions, breakthrough type of discoveries. And they reached out to Khan Academy about 5-6 years ago and said, well, we'd want to do something for high school students. And what we came up with is, what if high school students created short videos that explained a phenomenon in math, medicine, or science in just a novel way? And if you win the breakthrough prize, it is a lot. You get, I think it's a $250,000 scholarship. Your teacher gets $50,000. There's a $100,000 lab for your school. So it's like approaching $500,000 for a 3-minute video. So it's a good ROI, I think. and I am one of the judges. And, the ones that I've always found appealing are, it's always great to have a sense of humor. I would say almost every winner, not every winner, but especially some, if you can make someone chuckle while they're getting their mind blown, you're doing great. That's so humor is great, but I think the really good ones are just like, even for someone who's an expert or thought they know about that field, they're like, oh, I never thought about it exactly that way. And I think if you can give that aha, and many of the judges beyond me are some of these Nobel Prize winners, breakthrough challenge winners, things like that. So if you can make even a Nobel Prize winner say, I'm obviously an expert at that topic, but I never thought about it exactly in that way. And by the way, that was kind of funny. I think you have a good chance of winning. that's, and I would say it's not just about the prize, just the activity of doing it, I think is really, really powerful. And I think creating portfolios of things like this, regardless of whether you win or you're a finalist, you show it to colleges, you show it to employers, you show it to people you're interested in dating, and I think they'll be impressed. So let's see, maybe one question. Okay, I'll take this one from Instagram. Opium Yum says, how can I become smarter? I just feel like no matter how hard I try, I can't learn anything. Well, Opium Yum, hopefully your username doesn't correlate too much with things going on in your life, because that might be part of the explanation. But in all seriousness, I think you just have to have a growth mindset about it. This notion that somehow intelligence is fixed is a flawed way of thinking about it, and in some ways becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I think the best way to, quote, get smarter is to engage on things that you can engage on but are challenging to you and are a little bit frustrating to you. But what you find is if you keep engaging on it for 20, 30 minutes a day, 40 minutes a day, you're going to notice in 2, 3, 4 months that all of a sudden that thing that you thought was difficult, you're able to do quite well. It's just like anything. It's like going to the gym or running. If you run every day for 20 minutes, and you're going to shave minutes off of your mile before you know it. And so I would recommend Khan Academy is a great place to do it. It's all free. It's not all non-commercial. Start at the beginning of math if you want to start in math, and do 1 + 1 = 2. You can use the course challenges and the unit test to accelerate you through it. And if Opium Yum, you do 20, 30 minutes of that a day, come back in 6 months and tell me if you do not genuinely feel a lot smarter. Because I think in about 6 months, you will have gotten to your grade level. You will have gotten beyond your grade level. If you are an adult, you would have found that all of those things that you found intimidating when you were in, algebra class, whatever, you're like, wait, that's not so bad. Now that I have a good foundation, now that I'm really building a habit of learning it. So I think it's all about having a growth mindset, realizing that you learn the most when you step out of your comfort zone. You don't really know how intelligent you are until you push yourself. Failing, I like the term fail forward. Failing is actually an opportunity for growth. It's actually your best opportunity for growth. And you keep up with it, and really the sky's the limit. So I'm going to stop there. This is a lot of fun. I could keep going. But thank you for joining this live stream, and I will see everyone on Monday. So